our live feed screen back up, and we'll be ready to rip.
Here we are. We're starting up. There we go. Okay. Welcome back. And,
yeah, on Her Majesty's Secret Service is a big, long story. It's guilty pleasure favorites. Poor George Lazenby was way out of his league on it. It was a long genesis as to when it got produced, because it was the film slated to occur after Goldfinger. Why it wasn't had to do with McClory and the damn Thunderball lawsuit, because Ian Fleming had done a bunch of things with other people and had come up with the script for this Thunderball plot. And the problem was they had invented, McClory and Fleming had invented the damn Spectre. They had mentioned Spectre in the first Bond movies, and they didn't have the rights to do Spectre in the first Bond movies. So as a way of getting around that lawsuit of the highly litigious McClory, they arranged to do, in Secret Service, yes. They arranged to postpone the film and make a Thunderball as a movie, and he had a right, McClory had a right to do it again if he wanted to after like 20 years, which is why Sean Connery later redid the movie as Never Say Never Again. It was only an okay film, but anyway, they kept bumping Secret Service over. So after Thunderball, then they did You Only Live Twice, at which point Sean Connery had such a bad experience in Japan being mobbed by people, and he was just getting tired of the thing, so he decided to leave the film. Suddenly, they have this gigantically successful franchise and have a problem. Busted off on Her Majesty's Secret Service, and gosh, I've forgotten the name of the assistant director, but he was the guy that directed the film, and he had wanted to direct. He was a second unit director. You've seen his style all through the Bond movies. He does the set designs, and he loved ovals and wood textures and metal and things. And he also was the set designer, Ken Adam, the set designer on Dr. Strangelove, also ovals and highly stylized interiors and all that. Anyway, this was going to be his directorial debut, except now he's working with George Lazenby, who is not the livest wire on the block. So they had Diana Rigg, who was just off of her success as in the Avengers series that put her on the front burner. And forget that George Lazenby is in the story. It's actually Sean Connery wearing a bad George Lazenby makeup. The plot actually is really good. It has some of the most impressive visual sequences. It's got the chase scenes down the ski slopes, the Piz Gloria stuff up on top of the mountaintop at the restaurant with the revolving thing, and the sky ride stuff, the car chase sequences, the fight elements. The bit where they're stealing the stuff out of the bank vault and all of that, the pacing of it, good film, in spite of George Lazenby. Good score by John Barry, who was in his prime at that point. So I am of mixed views on Her Majesty's Secret Service. And after Lazenby didn't exactly set the house on fire, they were anxious to get Sean Connery colossal amount of forever, which he did just one more Bond film, and then they had to scout around for a replacement when they the late Roger Moore, and the rest was history from there. One of the things that's interesting about the whole look was they're dealing with widescreen or not. The first Bond films were not filmed in an anamorphic widescreen, and then they went full-blown widescreen for Thunderball, and they kept that through until the switchover when they went to Roger Moore, and they cut back, and they stopped doing widescreen for years. And they stayed in that mono mode all the way down to, I think, The Spy Who Loved Me, because by that time, Star Wars had come out. And suddenly, super duper Panavision widescreen, stereophonic sound, symphonic score, special effects fests were hot ticket items again. So then they dusted things off and they went widescreen and they went stereophonic sound, and they've stayed that ever since. So the cinematography angle, the visual style of Bond films has always been just as important as all the gimmickry and all of the Bond girls and all the other stuff. I vote Satan. I will argue that Goldfinger is my favorite Bond film. It's tight. It's only an hour and 42 minutes long, I think, something like that. The score is just kick butts. The only Bond movie where the song title is the villain. Gert Fröbe is just marvelous in it, and it is the most spectacular case of dubbing I've ever heard in a movie, because my jaw dropped when I discovered that he was dubbed all the way through the movie. Did an absolutely letter perfect. Fröbe, unfortunately, could speak English, but if he slowed down so that you could tell what he was saying, he lost all of his pacing. So Guy Hamilton just said, just read the lines your normal talking pace, and it was utterly unintelligible. And they had somebody redub it all. Line of all of the Bond films, and he says, well, what do you want, Goldfinger? Do you want me to talk? He says, no, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die. That wasn't actually Gert Fröbe. Oh, we have Connery. Oh, remember, yes, David Niven. Thank you, Satan. Yes, don't forget that David Niven played James Bond in Casino Royale, which, not the later one, but the comic version. That was another one that was dulled due to the lawsuits. The Salzman brothers had bought the rights to all of the Bond books except for the very first one. They never had the rights to Casino Royale. The bunch that were connected up production team nabbed up the rights to it, and they originally intended it as a straight movie, and they were slating Peter Sellers, who appeared in the movie eventually, but as Bond. Gradually expanded and ended up with 5 directors and an incredibly convoluted plot that just wandered all over the place, and everybody and his brother playing James Bond, and it turned into essentially a comic semi-musical. And another thing about the movie that's a soft spot for me, Nicholas Roeg, who later went on to do film direction, production designer on it, and his obsession with the color reds and the scenic visualness of it is just reeking of Roeg. And also, I think it's one of the best Burt Bacharach scores ever. Everything down perfectly in it. It's a wonderful score. It's clever, and some of the neatest women characters in it. All the most interesting people in the story are women. Dear Deborah Carr gets to do a comic slapstick routine. She almost never did that. And the bits she does with the where she's talking about the McTerry funeral lament, and she's doing a fake Scottish accent, and she goes argar argar gar gar gar. It goes. I just am slayed by that. It's a silly, stupid movie at many points, and yet it's got some of the funniest bits I've ever seen in films. So if you want to have a thing, you'll either love Casino Royale or you'll think it's the stupidest thing you've ever seen. You probably won't be ambivalent about it. But if you are willing to take the parts, to have to take the whole, to admit, yes, the thing is totally out of control by the end of the movie, it's got an awful lot of fun stuff in it. Book of Love, tune, that was from the film. One, I think it was nominated for an Oscar and it became a big hit at the time. And God, what's her name? Who plays the supposedly Mata Bond, the illegitimate child of James Bond and Mata Hari? Which, if you look at the chronology, can't possibly work. She's only like 30 years old in it, but God, she was fabulous in that. And Reina Lavi, later on in the story, and the banter she does back and forth with Woody Allen, it's just delicious. It's got pieces in it. Yeah, I agree with you, Julie. It's a very fun movie. And Xmas, I don't think I've seen that one. Yeah. Deborah Carr was marvelous. Collection of casting for the film. John Huston directed one of the sequences, and the guy that was one of the co-producers directed the end sequence. Whenever you see the CIA agents diving in Indian costumes with repeater bow and arrows, doing the frug around a fire thing with a seal that's flapping back. I mean, it's just out of control. It's out of control by that stage of the movie. It made a ton of money. Casino Royale was one of the big money makers of 1967. But it was also of an ambivalent concern if people were going, hell is this? And for somebody who wants something that's more in the James Bondish flavor, take a look at The President's Analyst with James Coburn that came out, I think, the year later. That's absolutely a spy film that wasn't Moonraker with the space Nazis? Yes, and the nearly embalmed French actor Lonsdale, who is just boring as hell in it. He had an emotional range that ran from A to B in it, and he's actually a wonderful French actor, and he was in a lot of different films. He's a perfectly fine person, but boy, it just was a thud. And it was also, I think, the last of the ones with Jaws. Jaws was a problematic concern because he was an over-the-top character. He gave Keel a wonderful career opportunity, and he was terribly memorable, but it was really weird. And then they try to kind of end up with a semi-happy ending with that. But yeah, Moonraker bore only a slight resemblance and was elaborately filmed with extremely slow space scenes, and a relatively lugubrious score by John Barry. So it's one that you have to kind of through. My favorite of the Roger Moore Bonds is actually For Your Eyes Only. It was apart from the idiotic opening sequence, the rest of the movie is really well done. A fairly straight spy adventure story. It's got Topol in it, who does a really neat turn. It's got good action adventure sequences, good chase sequences, and the like. It wears fairly well. My runner-up actually is Octopussy. That would be higher up, except it's essentially a remake of Goldfinger, and so I just can't quite rank it highly enough. It's the plot's almost indistinguishable from Goldfinger, and it's an okay flick though. It handles well. To look at some of the comments. Yeah, I love the President's Analysts. Whenever I hear muggers, if you haven't seen the President's Analyst, by the way, the DVD that finally came out is the original version of the movie. For years, the version that was shown on TV was never on the home video because there was some weird, some of the little pop songs that were done in the thing, and they could never get the rights to them, so they had different music for those sequences in the film on the Laserdisc and that. But finally, but the TV version always showed the original film version, and they finally got their rights ironed out. So the DVD version of it has that, and it's that you'll either warm to and will be cherishing forever, or you'll wonder, wow, this is weird. A story that I can't tell you anything about because it will spoiler alert. It's one of the most intricate, ingenious, quirky, satirical plots that goes after the CIA and the FBI and hippies and the gun culture, and it just is a whole bunch of stuff, and it wears really well. The kinds, if you know that 1960s worldview and look at where we are now, an awful lot of the stuff about it is as resonant today as it was in 1968. So it's a kicker movie, and a really neat score by Lalo Schifrin, very jazzy and quirky. Yeah. Yep, it is a satire. President's Analyst is a satire, definitely. It was a one-shot. James Coburn had made the In Like Flint movies, which were comic James Bond parodies, but he wasn't very fond of them, and he went off and did his own productions and it's Analyst. And the director, writers involved, this is basically their one film, and it didn't do well at the box office. It basically bombed, and Colburn's production company basically shriveled because of it. But I think everybody who has taste regards that as a masterpiece film. It is just dead on perfect and absolutely wonderful. Oh, groundbreaking movie, Alien. I'll agree. I'm ambivalent about it in many ways, though. A movie with a lot of people acting stupidly. Oh, we have a dangerous alien creature. Let's all separate so it can pick us off one by one. English score by Jerry Goldsmith. It 2001 style of interior sets, but everything dirty. Essentially was pioneered by Star Wars. Frankly, I like Aliens better. Cameron's sequel is richer. It's got more emotional depth, and it's got some goddamn rip-snorting action-adventure sequences. The 3-4 later films are just, it's okay. But no, I love James Cameron's one, especially in the longer version. If you have a chance to see the unedited director's cut of Aliens, as in most of Cameron's films, the longer versions are better. Condor Man, I don't think I've seen that. Oh, yes, Condor Man. Yes, now I think, yeah, I think I have seen that a bit. The lead in that also did Phantom of the Opera. I'm not sure. Yes, I agree with you, Judy, that you can't say anything at all about The President's Analyst because everything in it would be a spoiler alert. I will warn them to the wife when she says, "Muggers!" And it's like a visit with Mr. Lincoln. That's another one of my favorite take-home lines from The President's Analyst. Oh, yeah. Severin Darden. The late Will Geer. This was right when he was coming off of the blacklist. A lot of the people in the films were ones that were politically left, listed for years, and he was only starting to reappear in television at that time. He later played Grandpa Walton a couple of years after that. So he was always a pro in terms of performance. I've always loved Will Geer's stuff. The guy that plays the head of the FBI, actor, he just has a hilarious turn in there. I can't tell you anything about him either. And all the treatment of the CIA is kind of curious. Sort of gentlemanly William F. Buckley-ish. We have in the post-Watergate era with the church hearings, we tend to have a much less cheery view of the CIA, but that shows you how naive and innocent 1968 was. I got to agree with you, Richard. Aliens is a sequel better than the original. That's not always the case. I'll give you an example, though, of the all-time best remake ever, the Maltese Falcon, because that was not the first remake, it was the second remake. Warner Brothers actually had already made 2 versions of that movie, one of them called The Maltese Falcon and another one called Satan's Deal or some such thing, which I think had Bette Davis in it. Neither one of them are worth the time of day. I mean, they're pretty slow and tendentious. So dear John Huston, a screenwriter at the time and son of the actor Walter Huston, had wanted to do directing, and he talked the studio. Will you give me this old dead property that you got the rights to, the Maltese Falcon? I think I can do a nice low-budget B-movie production of it that will do well. And boy, did he. And it's just a stunning masterpiece of precision, and it was a B-movie. Adolf Deutsch that did the music for it, he was not the A-level composer. It was a low-budget movie, but doesn't look like a low-budget movie and doesn't feel like a low-budget movie, and instantly made John Huston into a director. Ah, The Great Dictator. Oh, yeah, yeah. Yes, that end speech that Charlie Chaplin does is fabulous. That's another movie that wears well. I am convinced that that movie was a staggering influence on Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks's role of mixing comedy and satire, political satire, has a very much feel to it. Although Chaplin himself said afterwards that if he had known how nasty the Nazis really were, he couldn't have made The Great Dictator. He would have been just freaked out. But at the time, nasty, but just how nasty, nobody quite had a grip on. But that end speech where he talks about the rights of man and the individual and how people can live together, is just wonderful. And it's a chance to see Paulette Goddard, who was his girlfriend at the time. She was a marvelous actress. I always loved Paulette Goddard. Another one to see for Paulette Goddard is The Ghostbreakers with Bob Hope, which I think is one of Bob Hope's best films. And it's a really neat, well-crafted storyline where Bob Hope is just at his peak, and it's their best collaboration. I remember Highlander vaguely, and it was not terribly great. It was okay. It turned into a long-running TV series. It was one, I guess, if you liked the format, it was fine. It was not my cup of tea. Oh, Blazing Saddles. Yeah, that's if you could have a Blu-ray player, get the Blu-ray edition because it's just a gorgeous one. It was the one film that he ever did in widescreen Panavision. Because they literally wanted to recreate the look. They even got the cinematographer who did a lot of the John Ford movies to do the cinematography on it. And they wanted it to look and feel like a big scale Western, even though it's also a wild, out of control comedy. And dear Gene Wilder in it. Jim, but all my friends call me Jim. And it was that collaboration that they worked together for the second time that persuaded the that little story that Wilder had come up with, Young Frankenstein. And that, of course, I would regard as Mel Brooks's masterpiece. Everything was perfect on that. Stan Laurel, two great influences on comedy, both British too. Yeah. Yeah, it's weird because in The Great Dictator, you get to hear Charlie Chaplin's voice, and he has this English accent. Stan Laurel was about the same way. Laurel was able to make the transition to sound. Chaplin was always a little awkward in it, and his career, although he didn't stop making movies into sound, it trimmed back considerably. But Laurel kept going as long as they could. He's how comedy teams work. Laurel is the one with the really awkward personality. Oliver Hardy was the one who was even-tempered, but they always play the opposite. And that was true of, Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin, and also of Abbott and Costello. That the one who plays the heavy in the routine is actually the even-tempered one in person, and the one who plays the nebbish is the one that's actually the prickly, neurotic reality in real life. And it's such a common dynamic in these comedy duos. Dudley Moore and Peter Cook, a bit there. Dudley Moore was more even-tempered than Peter Cook was in person. Peter Cook was a very abusive, tragic, alcoholic, somewhat self-destructive personality. And of course, then Dudley Moore had this absolutely awful disease that just shrank him up to a little nub at the end. That was just terrible. Or more reasons for not believing in gods. Oh, Frau Blucher. Oh, the Tingler. Yeah, that you bring into the wonderful world of Castle, William Castle. He was a knockoff wannabe Alfred Hitchcock, although he produced a few movies that were actually fairly sophisticated. He could manage it, but there was always a certain huckster to the guy. And The Tingler had Vincent Price in it, and it was a kind of a silly potboiler science fiction story that involved little buzzers on the seats and all that kind of stuff. It's a one they have a little bit of a minor soft spot for. But then again, anything with Vincent Price in it, you got to enjoy it just because Vincent Price is in it. Oh, yeah. Dear old Price was such an articulate, cultured man. Do you realize that in the 1950s, for a while, Sears had an art department that sold paintings in their stores, and Vincent Price was the consultant on that? Those were the days. The Inquisition, what a show, the Inquisition. The Inquisition's here, and it's here to stay. Oh, that must be a line from... The History of the World Part 1 and 2, I think. Life of Brian, yeah. I'm starting to be convinced RJ is just the newest Google-sponsored model of AI outlet for their fact databases. Is there nothing the guy doesn't know? Sports. Boy, you get on sports and you can stump RJ in 10 seconds. Oh, Jay, best version of the Omega Man. Actually, the one that was done with, yipes, a black actor, yipes, from Yeeks, that was done quite recently. Not bad, not bad. It's all based on I Am Legend. The Vincent Price version was dark and effective, but low budget. But Will Smith, Will Smith, the version he did was really quite well done. It was intelligently done. Singing that in that, I like that quite a lot. I'm ambivalent about the Charlton Heston Omega Man. It was a little artsy for its own good, a little too long. I think they needed to cut a few minutes out of it. And the cinematography, I think it was done around the same time as Soylent Green, and it had a kind of shot on the backlot look that it needed a bit more atmospheric cinematography, but there's a problem from the fact that it was filmed in color. Sometimes black and white works better, and you can get a grittiness through a conniption fit when it went color, because suddenly all the sets looked like sets, and they had to kind of go for much more pop-oriented. It's no coincidence Batman was such a hit, because it was nice, splashy color. But the black and white cinematography of televisions up to that point, I kind of miss a lot of that in the early 60s. Oh, English Premier League and Bundesliga to RJ. Oh, yeah, there you got me right off the bat on that one. I haven't a clue. I'll have to disagree with you, Jade, on that. I didn't mind the Will Smith version. I thought it was reasonably well done. Especially fond of the plot itself. It's essentially a kind of a science fiction zombie tale. Frankly, the one that I liked that was quite clever was 28 Days. 28 Days Later. That one was as clever a retake of the zombie apocalypse format as anything I'd ever seen. The sequel wasn't quite as good, but the first one was really quite good. Schindler's List, black and white, yeah. Dr. Strangelove, black and white. Psycho, black and white, partly because of the low budget aspect. It was essentially the stuff he learned from his television thing, but also he realized that if you filmed the shower scene in color, that you could do things in black and white. But there's so many, if you look at the black and white seasons of Wild Wild West versus the color version, the black and white first season of Man from U.N.C.L.E. versus the color version, the black and white, the Avengers versus the color version, I think they had a much better play in that black and white frame, in the same way that Ansel Adams can give you an illumination about Yosemite in a way that a color photograph wouldn't necessarily do. Yeah, 28 Days Later. Yeah. Yes, 28 days. Yes, I wouldn't want to confuse the titles. Oh, John Carpenter. Yeah, I'm ambivalent about John Carpenter. He is one area that's unusual. He's a composer as well as director. He often writes his own music, which is unusual. Yipes. Director. Clint Eastwood also does his own music. Like Charlie Chaplin, he's not a professional musician. Chaplin also wrote his own scores. The Great Dictator is unusual that it had a music written by somebody else. Typically, the scores to his films were one he hummed, and then he hired an orchestrator to turn them into actual orchestral scores. The Thing, of which I hope, the Carpenter version of The Thing is lamentable, but better than any of the other remakes that were done since. But for me, the original version is the masterpiece, Howard Hawks, and it's a puzzler because Howard Hawks often did multiple versions of things. And there's a couple versions of The Big Sleep. There was a pre-cut version and then there was a modified version. That's why it took so long to do. Well, the same thing with The Thing. I have a laser disc, has footage that's not in the official version. And the DVD has some of the unofficial version of like a director's cut format. and it's not got all the same stuff that's in the Laserdisc version. So there's a kind of a nebulous version of the original thing that is floating out there, that someday maybe somebody will put a super duper director's cut where they put all this stuff in. It was scored by Dmitri Tiomkin. The moment when they realized that there's a tail fin of a spaceship coming out of the ice, and that the music just builds to it fabulously. It's just incredible. Yeah, Carpenter is the one with Kurt Russell. Yeah, yeah. Silents were generally in black and white. The color process was being developed in the silent era, along with widescreen sound. And they were all experimenting one way or another. You found two-strip Technicolor being used for the Black Pirate with Douglas Fairbanks in 1926. And then the Magnascope, which was a big widescreen IMAX size image. The poor John Ford did a widescreen 70 millimeter film. I think it was in grandeur format. That came out in 1930, The Big Trail with John Wayne, that is kind of an isolated one, because the last thing the poor theaters needed in the sound era was having to do widescreen revamp along with all the damn sound equipment. So that nipped that in the bud until after World War II, when the threat of television jump-started the widescreen revolution, and they went hog wild for that for at least 20 years. Yeah, the original thing is the best. It's a tight thing. It's interesting. The role, it's intellectually interesting. The number of smart people in it. The fact that the woman in the tale is not a dumb flunky secretary. She's observant and sharp and equal to everybody else. Another one that has a very sharp egalitarian thing is Them, the giant bug movie from Warner Brothers. Where the scientist daughter of the entomologist is it has to tell the FBI agent, "Excuse me, my father is not in good enough health to go down there and look for the damned ants. You wouldn't know what to look for. I'm going with you." So she's no wilting flower, fainting kind of woman. She's a strong scientist in that. And to see that in 1954 is a sign of how you find that attitude of egalitarianism knocking around in the air quotes liberal film community. Same thing with earlier, 1949, the Adam's Rib, which is worth seeing just for Katharine Hepburn and Spencer Tracy. But that's also about women's rights and social issues and equality before the law. And this is 1949. There's another plot that holds up really well. Garson Kanin and her husband, or Garson Kanin and his wife, she was in Rosemary's Baby, the acting career. They wrote a just crackerjack script, and it holds up today just as effectively as it was 60 years ago. Maybe better black and white movie. Oh, it was, yeah, Them was all for about 10 seconds. Warner Brothers considered filming it in color, and then they saw what the damn giant ant models looked like in color and went, nope. And they switched to black and white, and so we're able to do effectively through sound effect and shadow and all of that. It's effectively a police procedural. You got James Arness, who was playing an FBI agent. This was his first speaking role after playing the homicidal alien Carrot in The Thing. And James Whitmore as the police cop. And it starts out as effectively a murder mystery where people are killed out in the desert, and they discover that the things doing them aren't people. They're a range of atomic bomb mutated ants. And it holds its own extremely well. It's got a very good cast. Leonard Nimoy, I think, is very briefly in it. If you spot him, I don't think he actually has any speaking parts there. So you can spot the future star in that flick. Gordon, there we go. Thank you, Jade. Rosemary's Baby, the origin of Dick Cheney. Yes, that could account for a great deal. Yes, except the Rosemary's Baby has more heart. Oh, ants. Yeah, there was a terrible B movie with, oh God, I can't think of her name right off the bat. I'll think of it eventually. And William Shatner in it too. It's done in the 1970s about these ants that were controlling people with their pheromones and that. And it was just an incredibly stupid story. But Them wears extremely well. I think if you like science fiction and you like tautly paced thing, it holds its own. Each one of the studios in the golden age of film made one classic science fiction and then a lot that weren't. So them was Warner Brothers, This Island Earth from Universal, Forbidden Planet from MGM, Day the Earth Stood Still at Fox, Disney's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I think that pretty much covers, and War of the Worlds from Paramount. Although they made a few more science fictions than that, but War of the Worlds holds up extremely well. And they kind of shot their wad. When Day the Earth Stood Still came out, and them, which is RKO, science fiction hadn't taken on the quality of B movies that it would in about 5 or 6 years. So by the time something like The Invasion of the Body Snatchers came out in '56, the science fiction thing was already going into a B level, but the Body Snatchers is a creepy classic. Better remakes. The Sutherland version in '70s that had Leonard Nimoy and that in it is pretty good. Not as good as the original, but damn good. And all the remakes since, and there have been 2, I think, or 3, are ones that you could just watch once and never have to watch again. But the creepy moments in the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, boy, that's good. Wrote the score for that. He was a minor player in the music department era, but for that one, he really pulled out the stops, and it's a very memorable score. Of the Ants, you got it. That was the one. Empire of the Ants, that idiot one. Forbidden Planet, Leslie Nielsen, yeah. Pulling out the stops on that. Was a very expensive movie, and filmed in CinemaScope and stereophonic sound. Widescreen. It did pretty well, but it cost a lot of money. And so MGM really got off the science fiction bandwagon after that. It, of course, produced Robbie the Robot. And the scenic designer on it, a Japanese engineer, I've forgotten his name, but he designed the spaceships and the interior sets and, of course, Robbie. And then went on when Irwin Allen wanted to do Lost in Space, the Jupiter 2 and the interior stuff and the robot for that were designed by the same guy. So if you wonder why they look a little bit alike, well, that's why. Yeah, remake. I haven't seen the remake of Red Dawn. I was only okay with the old Red Dawn. Battle Beyond the Stars. Yes, I am fond of Battle Beyond the Stars. That one is the Magnificent Seven, which is itself a riff off of the Seven Samurai. And of course, they got Robert Vaughn to effectively reprise the role he had played in the Magnificent Seven. It's a charming flick. Roger done by people who were remarkably talented. The guy that did the production design on it was a guy called James Cameron. The score was done by a guy named James Horner, who was his very first movie score. It had, I think, John Sayles as one of the script writers. Are you remembering these names? These are all people who went on to spectacular careers, and they were nurtured in that we love movies environment of dear schlocky Roger Corman. And it's a movie I'm very fond of it. It's not a great flick. It's a light, but there's a lot of heart to it. I care about the characters in it, which is more than you would expect for a lightweight movie. So yeah, I can heartily recommend that as something that is in my little guilty pleasure department. It's a charmer.